We're going to get started with today's webinar. The Agile organization starts with Agile people. I would now like to turn the conference over to Sean Isaacs. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you for joining us today. All of us at TRACOM appreciate you making time out of your day to be with us. We have an interesting topic today on agility, and look forward to sharing some information with you as well as getting your questions. A couple of housekeeping items before I turn it over to our main speakers. On your ReadyTalk tool, there is a chat feature in the lower left. If you are having any technical issues, feel free to submit them there, and we will have someone work with you to get you up to speed. Similarly, we will use that chat feature for questions. If you have questions either throughout the presentation or at the end when we have a traditional Q&A session, feel free to submit them. There will be a recording made of this webinar if you would like to go back and revisit any part of it or share this with colleagues. We will send you an email tomorrow that has the link to that recording. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David Collins, who will be leading your webinar today.
Hi everybody, my name is David Collins. I'm a Vice President and General Manager here at TRACOM. Welcome to our webinar. Let me introduce my co-presenter here today too as well, Dr. Casey Mulking. Casey?
Hi everyone, I'm Casey Mulking. I'm the Director of Learning and Development here at TRACOM, and I oversaw the development of the agility program that we'll be discussing today.
Terrific. Casey, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Okay, yeah, let's go ahead. So you're going to be learning a lot today, and we thought it would be a good idea if we started out the day by having a little bit of a problem-solving exercise, because problem-solving is something that we're going to be talking about today. So we thought this would be a good way to get you stimulated and ready to learn more. So what is the number of the slip in which boat XX is docked? So you'll see some numbers there and XX. So your job is to figure out what number comes next. So it's a pattern recognition problem. And think about that. Try and come up with an answer, or if you don't come up with an answer, that's okay. But use that chat function and type in your answer there, and I'll let you know what comes across and how everybody's doing. I don't see any answers coming through yet. Okay, got some coming through now. 108, 84. A few more. Okay, so most people it seems are not quite getting the answer right. Got an 80 in there. Another 80. It's a popular response. 08. So I'll tell you what, let me give you a little bit of a different perspective on this problem and see if that helps at all. Sean, go ahead and put up the next slide. Okay, now from that perspective, the answer should become a little bit more clear to you that the answer is now 87. So the good news about that is that most people don't solve this problem correctly. Most people don't get it right, so there's no need to feel bad about your mathematical abilities here. But the bad news is that if we had a lot of kids on the webinar today, young kids, it's likely that most of them actually would solve this problem correctly. And I'm going to talk about why that is in just a little bit. But the important point we wanted to make right now is that this is more than just a clever little parlor game. It's the same things that prevented you from solving this problem also keep you, other people, and companies themselves from solving much more important problems. So I'll talk about that in just a little bit, but I'm going to hand it back over to David now, and he's going to talk about agility and organizations. David?
Yeah, thanks Casey. And we started with a problem on purpose because the ability to look at the world in new ways to solve problems is more important than ever before in business. Things are going faster and faster. Competitive landscapes becoming more difficult. And honestly, it seems like disruption is practically everywhere. You know, history shows us that once-strong companies with amazing cash flows, places like Blockbuster and the Yellow Pages, can quickly become yesterday's news. And even companies focused on new business models with innovative cultures, companies like Samsung and Twitter, they need to stay on their toes too, or else they might soon quickly be passed by. And what we're finding is that, Sean, if you take it to the next slide, is that this isn't limited to just the unlucky few companies. In their book, Built to Change, Edward Lawler and Christopher Worley found that companies are coming and going at a very fast pace. The chart that's on the screen shows that even being one of the largest 20 companies in the world offers no guarantees for long-term success. Now, you can see from the 80s to the 90s to the 2000s that the turnover rate has increased substantially amongst these companies. And if you look at the last decade, 60% of the companies that started off in the Fortune 20 didn't end up there. And so if you were CEO of a company, what might you be thinking about? And I got a sense that's probably why a lot of us are here today. If you were thinking about it's time to get agile, you're right. And your thinking is not alone, in that you're going to find that there's a lot of people thinking about that as well. Agility is increasingly on the mind of corporate executives. There was a recent CEO Outlook study done by KPMG titled Now or Never. And out of the CEOs that they surveyed in that study, they said very close to unanimously that the next 3 years will be more critical for their industries than the previous 50 years combined. The next 3 years will be more critical than the previous 50 years combined. Developing organizational agility is obviously a key goal for these executives as they're looking at and trying to find new ways of thinking, new ways of executing at their companies. And what you're finding is that this effort is actually well placed, as there's an increasing amount of research that's out there and evidence that shows organizational agility really matters for companies. In fact, a study done by MIT not all that long ago shows that agile companies generate revenue faster and ultimately have higher levels of profit. And that's where we come in as learning professionals and have an opportunity to play a significant role. You see, in order for organizations to be able to achieve organizational agility, they need to unlock the personal agility that's in their people. And that's ultimately what we're going to spend the rest of the time in our webinar here today talking about how to do exactly just that. So let me turn it back to Casey on the problem that we worked on so we can get started on this. Casey?
Thanks, David. So that problem, I mentioned that a lot of kids would probably be able to solve that problem. And if some of you are parents and you have little kids, you probably instantly recognize how creative they can be and how they're just sort of naturally adept at seeing things from different perspectives. And this is more than just my opinion. So there's been research on this, and they took a large group of kids and they followed them over time, and they gave them problems like that one to solve. And what they found is that when they were tested at 5 years of age, 98% of them tested at the genius level in terms of their ability to creatively solve problems. Now they tested them again 5 years later when they were 10. Only 30% of them tested at the genius level. Followed them again over time. Keep in mind these are the same group of people, kids, when they were teenagers. Drops to 12%. And finally, when they became adults, only 2% of people tested at the genius level again. Now keep in mind, these are the same group of people, 98% of whom tested at the genius level when they were 5 years old. So the lesson here is that it seems that at least we lose the ability to think flexibly and creatively as we age. And the sad thing about that is that we just seem to accept that as a normal part of aging. But in reality, it doesn't have to be that way, because there are strategies we can use to change our thinking and our behavior. And that's what this agility course is all about. So we've just given just a real brief introduction to agility and maybe its importance in organizations. But I want to pause for a second and ask you a question again. So we're going to ask you a polling question. And again, use your chat function there to write in your responses or choose the response. The question we're asking, is organizational agility a topic in your company? Not at all, a little bit, quite a bit, or it's all we talk about. So take a few moments, give your response to that.
Okay, so everybody looks busy like they're filling out the answers. That's terrific.
Yeah. I'm seeing a little bit. Somebody said it's all we talk about, Jacques. Kelsey said not at all. Laura says a little bit.
If we take a look at the people that responded to the question, it's probably about 3/4 of people say that inside of their organizations, they're either talking about organizational agility a little bit or quite a bit, and then there's that elite group out there that's saying that's all that they talk about. So I'm not that surprised with what's going on in the marketplace, and of course, a webinar titled Organizational Agility. But if you're looking to learn some about it, hopefully we've got the right place here for you. So we're looking forward to the webinar. And Casey, anything to add?
No, I just say it's interesting that a lot of people are saying a little bit, quite a bit, just like we'd kind of expect. And about 20% of people, it looks like, said not at all. And so for those people, I think you're in the right place. Just stay tuned, because you're going to learn some things that may surprise you, and that you'll probably be able to relate back to some of the issues that your company is facing. So let's move on to the next slide, please. And here we've got a picture of a boat tethered to an anchor. So when you think of an anchor, what words come to your mind? And typically when we're running the course and I'm asking people this question, they say things like heavy or weighted down, unmoving or safe, things like that. And I just mentioned how people have this natural tendency to be a little bit self-limiting in their thinking and in their behavior. And the reason for that is that we have an automatic system in our brain that controls most of what we do day to day. So this is the part of the brain that's responsible for all of the habits that we develop and that we follow throughout the day. So things like driving to work. And that's a very good thing, because the brain is energy intensive, so that saves us from using energy to think about things that we shouldn't have to think about, like driving to work every day. And it saves our resources for more important problems. But unfortunately, the side effect of that is that we don't use our more effortful, rational brain as often as we should, and we end up taking shortcuts and making mistakes, even on really important decisions. So we get in the way, we get in our own way of being agile, and this happens through something called cognitive biases. Now, cognitive bias is a systematic error in thinking that leads to mistakes and bad decisions. And the key word there is systematic. So this is something that happens all the time, frequently for us, and unfortunately it happens below our level of awareness. So we're not even aware that it's happening and that these biases are influencing. But it's important because those biases contribute to what we call an anchored mindset. So let me show you an example of what we're talking about by a cognitive bias, and hopefully a little bit of a humorous example. So read through that cartoon. And this should resonate for you since it's election season. But this is an example of a bias called the confirmation bias. And what this means is that we look for and we interpret information in a way that confirms our own pre-existing beliefs. And like all biases, it's rampant. And this is especially the case with emotionally charged beliefs. So the upcoming election, again, is a good example of this, where people seek out information that confirms their beliefs, but then they discount information that's contrary to that. But because of this bias, it's very difficult to change people's minds on certain topics. And probably some of you are saying, oh yeah, that's very funny, and I know people that are like this, but I'm not. And if that's the case, then you're probably engaging in another bias that I like to call the not me bias, which means that you think other people are biased, but you're not. So next slide, please. There are many biases that hold us back from seeing things from different perspectives. And by learning about those biases, and then importantly, strategies to counteract them, we develop a more flexible way of thinking about things. And that ends up opening up new opportunities and ways to solve problems, and leads to what we call an agile mindset. So in essence, learning how to overcome those biases is just really an important part of our training program. It's really where we start, and you'll get an example of a couple of those in just a few minutes. So I just want to be really clear about what we're talking about when we talk about agility. So I'm going to read that definition. It's adopting a flexible mindset that promotes the generation and implementation of original and useful ideas. So we've got a few things underlined there. First of all, flexible mindset. That's really the core of it. Flexible versus being stagnant and rigid. And generation and implementation. So what's really important about our program is that we're covering the whole life cycle of not only generating, but also evaluating and then implementing your ideas and making that part of the regular organizational culture and process. And we do this through individuals, but also as teams. So in the program, we're teaching you as individuals strategies to be agile. But a team can also develop agility really in a couple of ways. One is just by playing to the strengths of different team members. So during the course, people get assessments. They realize what their strengths and weaknesses are, and so they can really play off of one another. But really the most effective way to do this is by practicing those strategies as a team. And by doing that, that will lead to greater team agility, which then leads to better organizational agility. So I know some of you might be saying to yourself, I'm not an agile person, I'm not a particularly creative person. I know people who are, but I'm not one of them. Well, guess what? Guess how much of agility is inherited? Not very much. It's only 20%. So that means that 80% of the things that we're talking about when we talk about agility can be learned and developed. And really all that's holding us back is recognizing those cognitive biases that affect us and how to overcome those biases. And if you think that's not very important, you should think again, because as the research shows that we put up there, people who initiate change have a much more positive impact on their companies than those who say that they just have the capacity to change. So I'm going to hand it back over to David again. He's going to give you an example of how this is done and how we actually do this in the course. David?
Thanks, Casey. So let's go ahead and just dive right in to learn a little bit more about what we can do to unlock our own personal agility. As Casey shared with you earlier, personal agility is about the generation and implementation of original and useful ideas. In order to do that well, research shows that there are 4 areas that we really need to focus on. And we call those areas investigate, design, energize, and apply. And if you think a little bit about what each one of those are, when we talk about investigate, it's really about how we go looking for and finding opportunities to improve things. Oftentimes we find is that some of the best opportunities are things that are hiding in absolute plain sight, but for whatever reason, we just can't see them. The notion of design is that it shows us how to move past tried and true approaches, enables us to generate far more creative ideas, with the notion of creative ideas being a very important piece there, so that we can consider and look at and evaluate as many potential solutions as possible when we're working on problems or issues. Ultimately, with Energize, we realize that agility is not an individual sport, but rather it's a team sport. And that requires us to reach out beyond ourselves. And then we're going to need to bring other people in the process to both create and support the new ideas and approaches and the things that we're working on. And then lastly, what research shows us is that in order to be effective, we need to ultimately apply our ideas and get them out working. So apply is really about uncovering and managing those hidden obstacles and challenges that are in the way of our deploying ideas, so that we can account for them, those hidden obstacles in our plans when we put them into practice. What you find in each of these areas is that our cognitive biases, the errors in thinking that Casey was talking about before, well, they all have a big impact on us. And unfortunately, while we'd like to think they all work for us, oftentimes they actually work against us. And it's not really until we truly understand what the cognitive biases are, and then we deploy some strategies that help us overcome them on an everyday basis, that we're really able to achieve personal agility. So I talked a lot, and I prefer to show. So let me bring a couple of the elements of personal agility to life here. I saw just the other day in the news that while most of us don't want summer to come to an end yet, that they started making snow here in the ski mountains in Colorado. In fact, I think A-Basin's scheduled to open up this Friday, believe it or not. So I thought an exercise about a snowman right now might be timely. So here's what I'd like each of you to do. I know most of you are probably sitting at your desk. I'd like each of you to grab a quick piece of paper and a pen. And I want you to take about 20 seconds to draw yourself a snowman, okay? Go ahead and take that 20 seconds, draw yourself a quick snowman. Pretend winters are coming. Okay, I know I tend to move a little bit fast here, so I'll give the group another second or two to get that done. Okay. So here's what we find when we run this exercise in our classes. We find that most people draw snowmen that are exactly the same. I bet if you look at the drawing that you put down on the piece of paper, that the one that you drew either had 2 or 3 circles, likely had 2 stick arms, had a carrot for a nose, a top hat for good measure, and even likely had a couple of different buttons on it. And what you find is that we all ended up with a very similar snowman because of something called the past experience bias. The past experience bias is something that gets in our way when we're trying to generate and evaluate as many ideas as possible, which is really what the focus is all about in the design part of the model that we just looked at. You see, what happens is when I asked you to draw that snowman, all of our brains go out and they search for the easiest solution of all, the one that it could find. And what it found is one that you'd actually learned many, many years ago. Your brain reactivates, in essence, the same neural circuitry that was developed when you first learned how to do it. And voila, when you look at the piece of paper, we all end up drawing essentially the same snowman. If you think about it, this past experience bias is really one of the reasons that we end up repeating ourselves so often. We end up developing the same solutions for different clients. We keep communicating with people in ways that don't necessarily work, but we do it again and again. And ultimately, we end up reusing the same ideas and the same approaches again and again, and that really limits our ability to be creative, which is a key part of being agile. And so if you think about it, ultimately we need to overcome our past experience bias, right? If we're going to be able to move forward in terms of increasing our agility. So how do you go about doing that? So one of the strategies that we teach is that we often find that the best way to generate unique and creative ideas for the problems or challenges that you're working on is to put your worst ideas first. And yes, I did say put your worst ideas first. And kind of let me give you an example of what I mean. The pictures that you're seeing on the screen are obviously of fish and salmon and trout. Now, there's about 80,000 dams across the United States. Many of which block spawning fish from getting back to the birthplaces that they struggle to return to each year. Now, over the years, conservation crews and people have tried all sorts of things to figure out how to resolve this problem, and most of what they've come up is really expensive. For the most part, people actually help these fish migrate by catching them, loading them into trucks, barges, and sometimes helicopters, and moving them upstream. It's a real problem, and it's really expensive. So if you're thinking about how is it that we can make things better, what kind of solutions might you come up with that would help you to move fish over a dam more cost effectively? Well, I'll tell you what, the right answer, and I bet you very few of you, if any of it came up, is to shoot them out of a cannon, of course. Yeah, I said shoot them out of a cannon. I know it sounds funny, but believe it or not, it's true. In the late 2000s, there was a company called Whoosh Innovations, a young company in the Pacific Northwest. They were struggling to gain a foothold in the ag industry. They had invented a tube that basically transported odd-shaped objects, things like apples, and they were using that tube and that technology to move the apples from tree to the truck in much less time than hand-picking them, and they did it without bruising them. So kind of think about it as what you might see in a bank drive-thru. So picture yourself at one of their company meetings where they're asking about, okay, we know what we're doing now, what can we do next to drive some more revenue? And can't you just picture someone saying out, hey, I know, let's make fish fly. Well, you know what? That's exactly what happened. Their CEO, Todd Deligan, said in that meeting they'd laughed at first when the idea came out. And then over time it dawned on them that it had actual real potential, and thus the concept of a salmon cannon was born. And believe it or not, the salmon cannon, easy for me to say, right, is real, and it works well, and apparently selling it's absolutely as funny as inventing it. At a talk at the National Hydropower Association, Todd talked not long ago, he said he hit the play button, and the first fish comes flying out of the cannon from the video that he was showing. And the audience is hysterical, just laughing nonstop. And then ultimately, it doesn't take all that long when people start talking about it, and they say, hey, holy cow, why hadn't we thought about something like that before it works? Well, I can tell you a little bit why they don't or why they haven't. Because you see, what ends up happening is the concept of ridiculous ideas, putting your worst ideas first, actually is very powerful because it frees up your brain to break up the habitual patterns of thinking. In other words, that past experience bias. This approach can open you up. It can help stimulate ways for you to think about new ideas, help find some unique insights, and all of which is a key part of being agile. And it's actually not that hard. I ended up using the strategy totally by accident years ago, even before its concept I realized that agility even existed. I was a young VP of sales at a high-growth company in the learning space. We were adding salespeople to fuel our growth, but that was kind of limiting because we had to go find them, we had to go train them, we had to go give them time to prospect, we had to give them time to turn their prospects to customers, and that ultimately took quite a bit of time to do. It was expensive, and it was impacting our growth. And I can remember being in a meeting with my CEO expressing the frustration of how long things were happening, and as part of that meeting, I just kind of blurted something out that said, you know what, maybe we should give up and just try to hire customers instead. And he laughed. But at the end of that laughing, we ended up talking. And we actually took that ridiculous idea and we quickly involved it into something that we ended up calling the Rapid Account Acquisition Program, RAP for short in our day. And what we did is we used the money that we would have paid for recruiters to go find and hire salespeople, and instead we decided we were going to hire customers. See, we gave away a free hour of custom e-learning training to some of the biggest customers in the market, some of the biggest prospects in the marketplaces that we worked. And it ended up being a huge success. After we got enough customers in that geography to try us, ultimately then we went back and backfilled in by hiring a salesperson to grow these accounts, and it sped up our growth astronomically. I can give you another example of somebody who applied this idea. A major professional services firm, a company that we do business with, in pursuit of a long-term deal with a financial services client. If they landed the business, it would be worth tens of millions of dollars for them. I don't know about for you, but that's a big sale for most people. The prospect they were going after was absolutely perfect for them, but they didn't think they could win the business because they had very limited experience in the industry that this prospect was from, and they didn't have a reference client. So they knew it was going to be an issue, and they were trying to figure out an approach to decide if they really wanted to go after this business. You should see it cost them thousands of manpower, people power hours to be able to do it, and they've got to make the decision if the pursuit was worth it. In a moment of frustration, as they were thinking about letting that prospect go by, someone said, oh, gosh, why don't we just tell them that we don't have any experience in this industry at all, and why don't we put that out in front and see what happens? And of course, same kind of idea, right? They got all that laughter. But believe it or not, when that laughter subsided and they started to talk about it, they realized they had something there. And so what they ended up doing is they decided they were going to go forward, and they turned that entire approach into going about telling that customer that they didn't have any experience in that industry or that prospect. But that's exactly why you should go out and hire us. And believe it or not, they won. See, they convinced that prospect that since they didn't have a flagship client in that industry, they were going to be so important to them that they were going to get their absolute best people on their engagement all the time. They were going to get an incredible amount of attention for them, and there wouldn't be anybody else that they could do business would be as motivated as they were. And so ultimately, these are just a couple of examples of how you can take your worst ideas to bring some creativity into what you're doing in terms of adding some agility to your company. And then what you find is that as these simple strategies are so powerful, they can be used by all sorts of people throughout your organization. So at this point, let me turn it back to Casey, and we can talk about another one here. Casey?
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Dave. I just wanted to point out I've been reading what people have been chatting on, and I wanted to point out a couple of those. Miriam said you could call them the wildest ideas, which I think is a great idea, especially relevant to the salmon cannon. Matthew wrote, in changed environment, so much of what we think we know or what once was so is no longer true. And that is very true, and that's really kind of the basis of a lot of what this program is about. A lot of what you learn is to deal with those kinds of changes that are so new today. So David gave an example of a strategy for developing ideas. And so I'm going to give you one more example, and this one happens after you develop those ideas, and it's about how you actually evaluate the feasibility of your ideas before you implement those. So our lives are full of ideas and plans. We often jump into them without giving them too much thought. So just a very simple example that we're all familiar with is going to the grocery store. So you have your list, it's all planned off, it's all planned out, off you go, and you think it'll take approximately an hour or so for you to go to the grocery store. But the problem is you pull into the parking lot, and it's not exactly what you expected to see. You don't understand why this will be the case since Who in their right mind goes grocery shopping on a Saturday morning? You get into the store. You thought it would look something like this. That's what it usually looks like for me. But in reality, this is what you get. Not quite what you had planned for. So you do your shopping, you get through it all, you finally get to the line, but the line is so long that you actually pass away before you get to the checkout stand. I guess that's a little bit of our Halloween humor for you there. But what you've fallen victim to is another bias, and this bias is called the planning fallacy. So this is just underestimating the time and difficulty of projects and how long and how difficult they'll take. So what happens is that when we make plans, we tend to put on rose-colored glasses. And again, like all these other biases we're talking about, this is really universal. This happens to virtually every project and plan ever conceived, it seemed. So we went back, we looked at a lot of research on this, and we found some examples of this. And one was the world-famous Sydney Opera House that you're all familiar with. And that was projected to open during construction in 1963 at a cost of $7 million. But in reality, it opened a decade later for well over 10 times the amount of money in the original estimate. So things like this aren't surprising, especially these large-scale projects, government projects. We looked at one bit of research that I thought was pretty interesting. It showed that the U.S. General Accounting Office found that with military purchases, they were delivered on time and within budget only 1% of the time. 1%. So let's bring it back, though. Those are big projects. Let's bring it back a little closer to home and something more personal. A lot of you have probably done some remodeling in your homes, especially the kitchen. And what people expect to pay for their kitchen remodels is a little over $18,000. But what they found in reality is that people pay over twice that much to remodel their kitchens. So that's a lot of money. And again, it's just another example of this planning fallacy, but this is probably not new to you. You're probably thinking to yourself at work, and you're absolutely right. It happens all the time at work. So what is the strategy for overcoming this planning fallacy? Well, we call it the pre-mortem. And it's a very simple, very effective technique. And the great thing about this technique is that it is simple and it really only takes a few minutes to run, and the benefits of it are really enormous. So you can run this technique for really small ideas right up to the largest projects that you work on, and you can do it over and over again at different phases in your projects. And the best way to do this is as a team, if you're working on a team. So what you do is you just imagine that it's 1 year into the future, that your idea has been a complete failure. And then every individual sits down, takes a few minutes, and you write a history of what happened and what led to that failure. And then you go around the table, each person reads their history, and you take notes of the main things that they wrote about, the main problems that they found. So why does this really easy technique work so well? It's because it helps you identify problems that you wouldn't have considered. And the reason you couldn't consider them is because you didn't have an objective frame of mind. So we all get knee-deep into our own projects, our own plans, and we simply can't get out of our own subjective mindsets. But by doing this technique, you're forcing yourself to adapt a more objective mindset. And that's what helps you come up with problems that you didn't consider beforehand. And then, of course, once you've done that, you can correct for them as a team. So it's really a great strategy. And I'm going to give a couple of examples of how this has worked out. One came from actually a client of ours. We were running a course one day, and we were talking about this technique, and he brought up his own example. And he was working for a hospital, and they were working on a project to increase patient satisfaction. So they had a really big team working on it, he said. He said they had a really great idea in place that they'd worked on over a long period of time. They were ready to implement it. And then they got ready to implement it, and at the last minute, the nurses union raised their hand and killed the program and said they wouldn't support it and wouldn't go forward with it. And the client said if they had just done this technique, used this technique, they would have recognized that that was going to be a problem right off the bat, and they could have involved the union right from the start, and the project would have ended up being successful. But it ended up going nowhere and costing a lot of time and a lot of money. And on a more personal note, we use this technique throughout the development of this program. So when we're developing the exercises and the strategies, we use this technique to try and recognize what some problems would be, and then combining that with the pilot testing. Over time, it really helped us to recognize areas where we could run into problems and to correct for those. So it's a very, very valuable strategy. I really love this strategy. So those are just a couple of strategies, the one that David gave, the one that I gave. Of course, the program itself contains many more strategies. We talk about other cognitive biases. And we developed this program really based on neuroscience and some of the more recent research in cognitive psychology to help people understand how they can overcome those biases. And one thing that we realized right away is that this program has to be very experiential. So people really need to recognize what their biases are. They need to see them firsthand and the impacts that those are having on them at work. And in that kind of visceral way, they can start to understand the need to make some changes. And of course, the strategies give them the tools to do that. And those strategies are new for people. They've never seen those things before. So let me just talk really briefly about some of the research and development that led to this program. We started about 2 years ago, and what we did is we looked at all the research on agility, but the problem is that mostly what we found was work that was being done around innovation and creativity, and for us that was a little bit too limiting. We wanted to develop something that was very business focused, that incorporated more than just ways to be creative, since ironically there's nothing particularly new about creativity and innovation. And our second goal was to develop an assessment, a really high quality assessment so that people could get feedback on their strengths and weaknesses. So we developed the model, the IDEA model that David mentioned earlier, and we developed an assessment around that. And we administered that initially to a little over 800 people, and we ran some analyses on that, reformulated it, and then we administered it again to over 300 additional people, new people. And the result of that is now a 40-item questionnaire that measures 8 elements of agility. And then with the program itself, we pilot tested that with a variety of organizations and industries for well over a year, and refined it and revised it before now releasing it. So an overview of the course. What we do is we bring people through that IDEA model throughout the day so that they begin to recognize the full life cycle of discovering new opportunities, developing ideas, getting support for those ideas, and then finally implementing them. And the assessment itself is really critical because that's what informs people about what their focus should be. It lets them know what their strengths are and what are some of the areas that they should be developing. As I mentioned before, it's really helpful in a team environment to get an understanding of what different people's strengths are. And throughout the day, we use a case study, an ongoing case study. And in addition to that, people work on their own work problems throughout the day, so it becomes instantly relevant to them. And at the end of the day, people come away with a plan in place for starting to implement those techniques back at work. And the agility journey that you see there is what that plan looks like. So it's really a very unique program. We think it's unlike anything else that's out there. And I'm going to hand it off to David again. He's going to talk about the benefits of the program before we finish up. David?
Yeah, thanks, Casey. And we're also going to leave plenty of time here at the end for questions from the group, too. We've had a pretty participative group here, so I want to make sure we leave them some time. But what I want to talk a little bit about here is that working on agility is very important for both people and also for the companies. You know, the research that we've looked at has shown that at the individual level, you know, agility enhances career satisfaction. It helps people get more promotions, and it gives people a greater sense of power and influence, which is really, really important. And we know through some of the things that we looked at earlier, right, and I think through our own experiences, that the pace of change is increasing, and that companies today need to work nimbly, and they have to be able to adapt. And the companies that are able to actually do that and able to achieve organizational agility, they end up being more competitive, they end up being more profitable, and they're more enduring than non-agile organizations that are out there. If you take a look at the approach that TRACOM's taken to that, is we're really working on a bottom-up approach to foster organizational agility by focusing on individual employees' personal agility. You see, Agile employees are able to capitalize on opportunities in the environment that they're in. They're proactive, they can create change, and then ultimately they perform at a higher level. And it's the cumulative effect of all those small changes that people can make in their jobs every day that ultimately have a real big effect on companies and ends up helping people get to organizational agility. And so ultimately, as Agile employees generate and successfully implement their original ideas, their bold ideas, they overcome those cognitive biases, right, that we've talked about throughout here that stand in the way between them and success. They attain agility. And ultimately, for an organization to be agile, they have to have agile people that work there. And that's really where we come in. And that's what we hope we've educated you on here a little bit today. And so hopefully today, you've had an opportunity to see a little bit that organizational agility is both important, it's impactful, and every bit as important as we can help our people achieve it. And as learning professionals, we definitely have a role to play in helping our own companies become agile. It's kind of what we do, right? And so we hope that you've enjoyed the webinar. We hope you found the information that we've shared with you to be both informative, useful, and honestly something that you can go back and apply today. And I think if you're looking at the area of organizational agility, you're going to find that our program is very unique, that there's nothing else that is like it out in the marketplace, and that we hope that you'll consider using it to help your employees and ultimately your companies get more agile and change for the better. So as part of what we wanted to give you here today for parting gifts, there's a few things we wanted to give with you. First, there's obviously a lot of information that we've shared. So as Sean had pointed out earlier, we are going to make a copy of the webinar available to you online so that you can replay it as you want, and feel free to share it with other people. We also have a white paper that goes a little bit more in depth into the areas of organizational agility that we're going to share. And we're going to send out to all the attendees that are on the phone here today. And I think perhaps most important of all is we wanted to give each one of you an opportunity to see how agile you are. We wanted to give you an opportunity to receive your own agility assessment. And so what we're going to do is that once the webinar has ended, we're going to send each one of you an invite, and we hope you take us up on it. We're going to give you an opportunity to actually go through the process to receive that agility assessment profile that Casey had talked about earlier, so that you can see where your strengths are in agility and where some of your opportunities for improvement might be, so you can experience personal agility for yourself. So look out for the replay, the white paper, and an opportunity to take the assessment. We hope that you've really enjoyed everything that we've shared here with you today and that you found it valuable. And at this point in time, I wanted to thank you and then turn it back over to Sean here so he can direct us through some questions. Sean?
Great. Thank you, David. We do have a few questions in the queue here. I'm going to encourage anybody that has any questions, comments, or needs clarification to use that chat feature now, and we'll go up till the top of the hour to answer as many as we can get to here. The first one that I wanted to pose is Diana asks how this program could be integrated into work on growing innovation in an organization. So maybe the difference between agility and innovation and how they might work together.
Sure, I'll take the first stab at that one, Sean. Certainly it can be integrated into innovation in organizations. One thing that you'll see about the program is that we talk a lot about creativity and innovation, but it goes beyond that. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But one of the things that you learn in the course is how to uncover opportunities that you didn't know existed. And I think that's really at the heart of innovation. That's what companies are asking for when they're saying we need to be more agile, we need to be more disruptive and take the next step forward. A lot of the strategies that we talk about in the program are related to that. And so to me, that's really what the core of innovation is about. So it certainly addresses that. What I think it does is that it goes beyond that, because it gets around to the full life cycle of not just coming up with those ideas, but then the real practicalities around what do you do with those ideas, how do you test out those ideas, and then how do you implement them in a way that they're going to make a difference and that they're going to succeed. So I think it incorporates innovation, but it goes well beyond that to incorporate the full life cycle and to make that an ongoing part of the regular processes that an organization works under. And I think it's just a very practical, holistic approach.
And Casey, let me just add to that just a little bit here too, from the conversations that I've had with people and the dialogues with customers. When people are talking about innovation, a lot of times they're implementing a process inside of the company relative to innovation. And what we do is we actually layer into that process in a very strong way. And that what we're doing is we're helping people realize what those biases are, what that mindset is, what the challenges they have on a personal level that are getting their way from being able to execute that innovation process even more so effectively. And so I actually think if you're a company that's strong in innovation and looking at doing some things, this is a great opportunity to actually add to that approach and to not only focus in on innovation on just a select few, which is what typically happens with innovation programs. There's a group of people who are in charge of doing that. This is an opportunity to bring that skill set out to your whole organization at large. So Sean, let me kick it back to you for our next question.
Yeah, actually I'm going to pose two here, and David, you might be the one to take this first. One asks about the actual specifics of the course, how is it taught, who facilitates it, et cetera. And then the other is potential audiences inside of a company who might be appropriate for this.
Sure. So let me handle the first part about how it's taught. So the way that it's taught is TRACOM is very flexible in terms of how we allow our intellectual properties to be deployed. So we've got options where you can hire TRACOM to come in and deliver the program. You have other options where if you'd like to become the experts and deliver the program yourself, that we actually teach you how to do it. We go through a certification process. We bring you up to the knowledge set that we have and the background on the materials that we put together so that we can make you the expert to be able to do that. There's also opportunity here, honestly, that if you see a custom fit or something specific for your organization, you don't necessarily need to run it exactly as we've designed it. We can also include this material inside of other programs that you might have. So there's lots and lots of ways in terms of deploying it. In terms of what the audiences are, I think if you look at agility in general, I think it has a fit all the way across an organization, all the way from the CEO, all the way down to the janitor and back up. Because I think you've got the ability to do this in a way that can help the organization at all levels. So some of the places that I might look at if I want to know where to start is I might look at some people that have the ability to be leveraged during a leadership role. Casey talked a little bit about that concept of team agility. Imagine if your managers or leaders, as they're getting ready to deploy new projects, were running the pre-mortem exercise out there. How much more successful would they be? By teaching your manager or leader to do that, you can actually bring that skill out to a larger group in the organization, project leaders and others. Anybody that's looking to generate change, anybody that's looking to get the most out of their team, anybody that's looking on how to apply this and make sure those ideas that they're bringing actually work will greatly stand to benefit. Casey, anything to add to that?
No, I don't think so, David. That's, you answered those questions. I was just reviewing some of the other questions that have come through. So, Sean, I don't know if you have some in the queue for me.
There's a great question here from one of our clients, and he's asking, what are the distinctions, differences, and connections between agility and resiliency, which is also a program and assessment that TRACOM offers. So if you could talk about how those two work together and build on each other or are different.
Sure. So yeah, the program on resiliency, I think the main difference between the two is that resiliency is related to how you respond to change, in particular difficult change that is thrust upon you. So bad things that happen at work, we all have kind of been victimized by that. Resiliency is all about that and your ability to adapt to change and recover from change. Agility is a little bit different in that what we're doing here is we're helping people to create change. So this one is a little bit more disruptive in that when you're working with agility, you're actually creating the change. Whereas with resiliency, you're learning how to respond to change, but change that is put upon you that you don't make yourself. That's really the main distinction between those two programs.
Great, thank you. A couple of questions that I think are getting at the same issue. Matthew asks, to facilitate individual or team agility, doesn't the company need to be open to change and innovation? And then another question asks about change often is stalled by barriers like conflicting departmental preferences, slow decision making. So how would this course deal with the fact that even if a team or a person wants to create change and be agile, they may run into barriers and roadblocks elsewhere in the organization?
Okay. Yeah, David, I'll take a first cut at this one if you have anything to add. I think it's a really good question. It's one that's come up before. I think with the company, needing company support, there's a couple of ways that I address that. One is that I think it's very true that you do need support from the company. My experience has been that the organizations that are interested in agility and willing to invest in it usually are on board, so they are supportive of it. But that doesn't always address the whole problem. We thought about this a lot as we were designing the program, and we designed it in a particular way just to address this, and we call it just a bottom-up approach. And what that means is that we're teaching individuals and teams the tools that they need to operate with agility and create change. And we believe that by doing this, what they'll do is they'll impact the rest of the organization. So when you get teams and you get departments that are all of a sudden doing things differently, they're implementing different processes, they're starting to come up with new ideas, be very creative and innovative, that's going to have an overall effect on the organization from a bottom-up point of view. So it's a great question because that really was an issue and a concern of ours right from the get-go, right as we started designing the program.
And Casey, I think you can think of it from a sphere of control or influence perspective, right? And so you don't necessarily need to invent the next iPhone for agility to be of value. We all have certain control of elements of things that we do in our job on an everyday basis. And so really what this does is it arms those people and those teams that they work on with the ability to control and influence those things that they do themselves in their job each and every day. And I think what you find is the more of that you get in the organization, you've heard the saying, a rising tide lifts all ships. And so the more of that you have, that tide begins to rise. Of course, the more open your company is and the more top-down the approach it is, I think the sooner you're going to have the overall organizational results that you're looking for. I saw another question, too, here that talked about audiences again, whether this would be suitable for top levels, bottom levels. I think it's really suitable for all levels in the organization. And I think you could do this something as high as a board level within a company. I might do it a little bit differently with the board level in that I might turn it from a classroom program of how we taught people about organizational agility to more of a facilitated session where we worked on some things or some ideas or some strategies that they were trying to execute. And we actually took the tools that we had in the classroom and applied it to their situation. So I think it would go up and down the organization rather well.
Yeah, and I think there's also research out there, and it's addressed in the white paper, that it's not just the gigantic big idea that we're trying to achieve here, but competitive advantage is really built off of the many, many small ideas that can be implemented at the individual, team, department level. And this course, by having those individual skills, individual assessments, and those techniques that you learned today, allow you to achieve a much greater number of, albeit smaller, but still incrementally impactful changes. Another question is, again, more about the delivery in terms of instructor-led training, online versions. David, can you walk through what is available today?
Sure. What's available today is an instructor-led classroom experience with people. As Casey pointed out, the experience is very, very highly experiential. that we actually walk people through those cognitive biases by having them experience it. In other words, creating the gap so that they can see it and they can feel it. And then once they understand that, they're really able to understand the impact. And then from that, we get the buy-in and the ability for them to go execute some of these strategies. Now, some of these strategies are different. They're uncomfortable. They take a little bit of getting used to, and that's why they work. And so having that experience is very important. If you've got an interest in the agility program and see other ways to deliver it, like I said, we're very flexible with it. We'd love to have a conversation with you. We encourage you to talk to us about it offline.
And then exactly like the other TRACOM courses and programs around behavioral EQ, social style, the assessment that participants and learners go through, there's the multi-rater assessment, so you really get a sense of how others see your behavior, knowing that our own self-perception is influenced by those biases that we've talked about. So the assessment and profile that you get really is an eye-opener to the participants, and hopefully you will all take us up on that and get your own personal assessment and debrief. Unfortunately, we are at the end of our hour. We do appreciate everybody taking the time to be with us today. Look for the email that has the replay link and the white paper, and then you will actually get a separate invitation email to initiate your agility assessment. With that, we're going to conclude today. Thank you to our speakers, and thank you especially to all of our participants.